What's going on, snooker fans? Another week goes by and it's another tournament ticked off the snooker calendar, and a tournament very similar to the German Masters a couple of weeks ago, where the draw seemed to really open up right from the start, but ultimately ended with a prolific winner getting his hands on another trophy. There were a series of early exits from big players yet again, one of whom was Shaun Murphy, and the reason I highlight Shaun in particular is because he is in very real danger of having to qualify for the World Championship in a couple of months. And do stick around until the end of this video, because I will be having a provisional look at the race to the Crucible, because there are a lot of interesting storylines to develop there as the season gets closer and closer towards its showpiece event. But before we get there, let's have a look at some players who did enjoy some success last week, starting with Luca Brecel, who we have talked about a lot and in a pretty negative light of late. And he continued to show signs of a return to form with a run to the semi-final, with wins over players like Stuart Carrington, Noppon Sankam and Pang Jung-soo. And it was such a massive shame, really, that he seemed to be suffering with a bit of a migraine during that semi-final against Selby, which could have put a serious dent on his chances of getting to the final. Still though, any talk of him losing his tour card can definitely be put to bed now, and he will now be looking to defend as much of that $500,000 prize money that is set to fall off his rankings come the season end. Ali Carter, winner of the very first tournament of the season last summer, also found some form last week as he got to the semi-finals as well, which was a huge result for him because, as I will point out later, he was a man sliding rather drastically down the rankings and is in desperate need of ranking points to keep hold of his top 16, which still is up in the air. And the man to beat Ali in that semi-final was Stephen Maguire. And you know what? I've always had a bit of a soft spot for Mags. I really have. To say he's a hothead is putting it mildly, but there is something to really love about watching him when he is 100% committed to the job. And that's exactly what he was last week. Reaching his first final since the Tour Championship win 5 years ago, he will, I'm sure, go down as one of the biggest underachievers in the game, especially when you consider the kind of future he was talked about having back when he won the UK title in 2004. And there is also an interesting article from a few years ago where Maguire talks about himself and Matty Stevens in that regard. But I do think he has a pretty measured way of looking at it. Deep down, I'm sure he is gutted not to have done more in the game over his career, but he's never really outwardly commented on his CV. Still though, 13 professional titles and competing for over 20 years near the very top of the sport is more than decent by most men's standards. And as proved last week, he still has it in him to achieve more before he puts his cue away for good. In terms of those flying the flag for the Welsh last week, it was youngster Jackson Page who got the furthest for the home fans, reaching the quarterfinals before losing out to Luca Brecel. And this season has definitely been a step in the right direction in terms of consistency for Jackson. He's reached a final, a couple of other quarterfinals, and the reward for that is being in the top 32 on the 1 year list, and therefore will be playing at the World Grand Prix at the very least, with a chance to perhaps land even more prize money between now and the season end. Moving on to Jack Lisowski, and I bet most of you watching this uttered the words, maybe this is Jack's week this time. But as has happened the previous 86 times we've dared to dream of Jack Lisowski going all the way and winning a title, he fell at the quarterfinal stage. I can't really criticise him for that loss against Stephen Maguire. He didn't play that badly, but God, it hurt seeing this reoccurring outcome happen time after time with Jack. The good news for him is he sits 16th on the 1 year list, so he is in a really good position to earn more money, just like Jackson Page before the Crucible, but it's another disappointing end to what could have been an amazing week for him. John Higgins, in a similar vein to Lisowski, may have had fans starting to believe that this may be the week that he finally picks up silverware again, especially after winning his first 3 matches without dropping a frame. But then he ran into Mark Selby, and is so frequently the case of late when Higgins plays one of the very best in the sport. He came out second best in what was an absolute marathon best of 9 match, which lasted just over 5 hours, which even for those two granite players is some effort. And there's also a couple of players, I didn't actually watch any of their matches last week, but they did have notable results, and that's Sanderson Lam, who beat Barry Hawkins and Wu Yiza, and also Joe O'Connor, who made it to the quarterfinals with wins over Liu Haoshan, the world champion Kyle Wilson, and Hove favourite Matthew Stevens. And because I always need an excuse to name drop Neil Robertson, despite losing in the last 32, Neil claimed the 150,000 bonus of finishing first in the Bet Victor Series list this year, helped primarily by winning the English Open and then reaching the quarterfinals in the Northern Ireland Open as well. It doesn't help his rankings, but a welcomed bonus I'm sure in the Robertson household. But the man who ultimately walked away with the trophy was Mark Selby, who joins Judd Trump and Kyron Wilson as a player to win multiple titles this season. The win moved him level with Neil Robertson on 24 career ranking titles and also meant he leapfrogs O'Sullivan in the rankings and now sits in third place, although still some way behind Kyron and Judd, who are in first and second. But I think perhaps even more importantly, this result will really cause some eyes to look at this man's chances of a fifth world title. We already know how good he is in Sheffield and will always be near the top of the list of favourites when it comes to the World Championship. But if he's winning titles in the lead up to the Crucible, that just cements his position there even more. He was granite all the way through as usual, but particularly in his final 3 matches against Higgins, Brecel and Maguire. He's rediscovered that winning feeling this season and most importantly seems to have turned a corner off the table too. I'm not sure what the odds are for him to win the World Championship, but if I was a betting man, I would have enough to suggest he may go very, very close yet again this spring. And that wraps up the tournament, but I did want to end this video by looking at the race to the Crucible. We now only have 1 tournament left, which is open to the entire tour, but once that World Open finishes, it is the 3 invitational events from the 1-year list, and then it's Sheffield. So it is so important for some of the names who I'm about to mention to get results and ensure they play in as many of the upcoming events as possible. This is the live rankings as it stands. Zhao Guidong occupies the final top 16 spot with the likes of Jack Jones, Neil Robertson, Stuart Bingham and Jack Lisowski all in hot pursuit. And also notice how Shaun Murphy isn't here, as he currently sits in 8th, comfortably in the top 16. However, Shaun is set to defend a lot of money from his wins at the Players and the Tour Championship 2 years ago. So if we now look at the provisional rankings for the World Championship, you will see quite a change. So as it stands, the Masters champion is in 20th place in that race to the Crucible and will have to qualify for the World Championship. Ali Carter also, despite his run to the semi-finals last week, is out of the top 16 as it stands. Neil Robertson has climbed to 16th due to the lack of money he has to defend for the rest of the season. However, he is only £3,600 above Chris Wakeling, and that loss against Tom Ford last week could be massive, as Tom is one of those in the chase and pack as well. Neil also carelessly isn't in China this week because he got the date of his qualifying match wrong, so he now can only rely on the World Grand Prix, the Players and the Tour Championship, though he is sitting pretty in 6th on the 1-year list. Gary Wilson's struggles leave him in a precarious position too. He currently sits in 32nd on the 1-year list, so he desperately needs results in China too in order to ensure he at least qualifies for the World Grand Prix. And yeah, as it stands, I would suggest everyone from maybe John Higgins in 12th and up is safe, but there is a lot of prize money to play for, and every win for these guys, especially around sort of 13th to around 25th in this list, will be absolutely huge. So this is definitely something to keep your eyes on over the coming weeks as we begin to turn our attention towards the big one, which starts in a little over a couple of months' time.